My name is Jen Budney, and I'm the executive director here, and I'm really pleased to see this excellent turnout for the talk. One never knows when it's minus 30 outside if people are going to want to leave their homes, and so I'm grateful to all of you for making the effort to come here today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Ukrainian Museum of Canada is located on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. We honor the First Nations and Métis peoples who've lived on and cared for this land since time immemorial. Through the Truth and Reconciliation process, we've been reminded that there can be no reconciliation without truth. Museums, journalists, and cultural institutions share a responsibility to confront difficult histories honestly and to create space for dialogue grounded in respect, accountability, and integrity. We commit to doing that work thoughtfully and in relationship. This weekend, of course, we mark 4 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It's been a war fought with tanks and missiles, but also with narratives, distortion, and deliberate deception. Disinformation has not been peripheral to this conflict, it's been central to it. And that's why today's lecture could not be more timely. We are honored to welcome Justin Ling, investigative journalist and columnist for the Toronto Star, where he covers national security, technology, politics, big tech, and information warfare, and where these forces collide. Over the past decade, Justin has built a reputation for rigorous investigative reporting, incisive analysis, and a deep commitment to public understanding. He has a Substack, if you don't know yet, called Bug-Eyed and Shameless, and I encourage you all to subscribe to it. His work has examined extremism, disinformation ecosystems, foreign interference, and the ways digital platforms can amplify division and harm. He's not simply reporting on the information crisis, he's helping Canadians understand how it functions, how it spreads, and why it matters for democracy. His talk today, "We've Lost the Fight Against Disinformation. What do we do now?" asks a difficult and provocative question. It challenges the comforting assumption that truth naturally prevails. It forces us to confront the reality that democratic societies are vulnerable and that safeguarding public discourse requires vigilance, literacy, accountability, and courage, and maybe some other strategies as well. As a museum committed to cultural memory, public value, and democratic engagement, we believe conversations like this are essential. If museums preserve truth across generations, journalists defend it in real time. Both roles are indispensable. We're grateful to Justin for coming all the way from Toronto to join us today, and we're grateful to all of you for engaging in this important conversation. Please join me in welcoming Justin Ling.
Thank you so much for having me here. I will say I constantly get invited to Saskatoon in February. I'm begging you, invite me back any other time of the year. I'll even take November. That's totally, if it's June, that'd be great. November's okay too. It's lovely here, it's too cold. And I live in Montreal, and I know something about cold. Listen, so I'm very excited to do this talk today. It might not be the cheeriest conversation, but listen, I think if there's one group that understands that cheery is not always possible, it's the Ukrainians, unfortunately. So I think we're all in good company here. But nevertheless, I think it will hopefully end on, to some degree, a happy note, and that's okay. I'm going to start by telling you a little story, and then we're going to get into some of the meat of what I want to talk about today. Some of you might be familiar with at least part of the story. Some of you may have never ever heard it before. Actually, if you subscribe to my Substack, you at least heard a little bit of it in the past. This story begins with a guy named Mark Blumenfeld. And I'll tell you right now, there's no reason for you to know that name. He's a super unassuming guy. He was, in 1989, the superintendent of an apartment building in Moscow. And in the summer of 1999, he receives an inquiry about renting a space in the basement of his building. The interested renter shows up, he flashes his passport, it says his name is Mukid Labanov, and he's a local businessman. He pays for the rental, nothing seems totally amiss. He actually forgets all about this interaction until September 9th, a couple weeks later. An explosion rips through the building. It levels the middle of the apartment block. It kills more than 100 people. By some estimates, it took 800 pounds of TNT to deliver this degree of blast. Investigators say the bomb was placed in the basement. So Blumenfeld thinks, my God, maybe this guy, maybe this one I rented the basement unit to is responsible, or maybe he at least knows something about it. So he goes to the police, and he tells them everything. Police run the name. It turns out that the real Mikhail Lapanov had died in a car accident a month earlier. This is spy thriller stuff, I appreciate it. But Blumenfeld provides a really detailed description of the guy. Clearly has very good memory. He's a white guy, thick glasses, obsessively neat haircut. It's a pretty distinct portrait, and the police get a sketch artist. They get ready to put it in the newspaper. Someone for sure is going to recognize this guy. And the next day, in the newspaper, Blumenfeld picks it up, and he realizes that the photo, the sketch he provided to police, is not in the paper at all. That on the left is the guy he rented the basement unit to. The guy on the right is who shows up in the newspaper. The guy on the right looks nothing like the guy he saw that day. The guy on the right has darker features, no glasses, bushy eyebrows. He looks, people notice, distinctly Chechen. Between the sketch on the left, the actual description of the guy likely to be responsible for this bombing, and the photo on the right is this gap between reality and unreality. It's the gap between what is true and what the state suddenly says is true. Police would give this guy, the guy on the right, a name. They said it was Akhmez Guchiayev. And Moscow said he was a Chechen terrorist responsible not just for this one bombing, but for a series of bombings across Russia. In the context of this massive, widespread terror attack, pretty comparable in scale and trauma to 9/11, Russia got a new president. His name is Vladimir Putin. And it got a new war in Chechnya. The state was clearly lying about aspects of these attacks, but for years, nobody challenged it. But Blumenfeld was always adamant. He had never seen this Chechen man in his life. He would tell journalists, researchers, and activists this over the years. He would show them that original sketch, and he would say, the public is being lied to. Some people would try and tell the public the truth. Some of them disappeared. Others, including Blumenfeld, wound up in prison. Others died suddenly. One of them is a former KGB officer named Alexander Litvinenko. He wrote a whole book detailing his belief that the Russian government, not Chechen terrorists, were responsible for these bombings. For his trouble, he was poisoned with polonium-210, a radioactive substance, and he died in terrible agony. There are a lot of points in this post-Soviet history, in our modern history, and we're in a building that really reckons, I think, with that post-Soviet history. There's a lot of these moments that really pave the way for the really screwed up moment we live in right now. But I think about this sketch as being a really illustrative and representative example of how we got here. At the point where this happened, Russia was still, in 1999, at least nominally, at least according to the US and Canada, a democracy. Maybe not a liberal one, but some form of a democracy. It had more or less a free press. It had institutions that were notionally independent. It had laws that were enforced, police that were not required to follow the party line. And yet, this lie had been allowed to become the truth. A sketch produced by an eyewitness had been simply changed over his own objections. And they used this alter narrative to launch a brutal, bloody, pointless war that the whole world watched. But that's not really the interesting bit. The really interesting bit is that the public accepted it. They knew, thanks to Litvinenko and others, that this photo was a lie. They knew the Chechen connection was probably invented. And yet they went along with it anyway. One might wonder if George W. Bush learned a few lessons from this in the years that followed. I think about this a lot, because I think about misinformation a lot. And I think about the ways in which we lie to each other, and the ways in which we lie to ourselves. Over the last decade, we've become really obsessed with this problem of lying. We've even given the societal ill a name, misinformation. We've talked about how we can fight back, what we, the partisans of liberalism, can do to win. how we can be first with the truth, how we can build up systems that prioritize facts, how we can develop countermeasures for this illness. We call these things fact-checking, digital resiliency, pre-bunking, media literacy, you name it. We developed all these strategies to hope that things like this never happen again, to show ourselves that we're different than states like Russia. But I'm here to tell you that in this fight against misinformation, we lost. It's now possible to take this metaphorical police sketch and replace it with a photo of a completely different man, and to do it on an industrial scale. Now you can do it with artificial intelligence, and it'll take absolutely no time at all. You don't even need a real photo, you can just make one up. We, partisans of the truth, no longer own the information ecosystem. The enemies of truth do. Nobody reads our fact checks, at least not those who need to. People don't care about these pre-bunks. Institutions and trusted interlocutors do not matter, at least not to the people who want to believe the lies. In our system of knowledge, truth is no longer a significant factor in the popularity of information. And we need to acknowledge this. Because once you accept these facts, it frees you from the need to pursue a lot of things that don't work. It forces you to reckon with the fact that we've uploaded so much of our society to a madness-inducing, high-velocity rage machine, the keys to which we've handed over to autocrats, demagogues, and oligarchs who profit from them. Misinformation may be winning, truth may be down, but it's not out. So, that's my little intro. I want to break down the rest of my talk into 3 parts. 1, featuring the wonderful Mr. Zuckerberg up here. It's going to be all about how we built this information system and how we built it to allow for, even to encourage, misinformation on a truly grand scale. In the second part, I'm going to talk about how bad actors, including Vladimir Putin, exploited this fact to sell incredibly marketable conspiracy theories and lies. And 3, I'm going to talk a little bit about how exiting this system is easier than it sounds. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Ukraine. Okay, so the simple fact is that people in North America believe a lot of misinformation. This 2023 Leisure poll found that nearly 80% of Canadians believe in at least one conspiracy theory. I'll read these out. I know the text is incredibly small. Maybe put your hand up if you agree with these theories. 5% of Canadians believe, or at least told the pollster, the world is flat. Statistically, one person in this room believes it. 11% told the pollster the moon landing was faked. 32% believe that COVID-19 was designed as a bioweapon in a lab. Even if you accept that people love lying to pollsters, and I get it, it's fun to lie to pollsters, it's pretty inescapable that the popularity of nonsense has exploded over the last number of years, and the nonsense is getting bigger, and more bold. America showcases these trends on steroids. 32% of the United States, including 66% of Republicans, believe the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. Nearly 30% of all Americans told pollsters they believe Democrats are involved in satanic sex trafficking. About the same number believe that Barack Obama was born in Kenya. That's a real throwback. About the same number believe that Ukraine is a bioweapons laboratory for the US. There's no great mystery as to why this is. Human beings are prone to paranoia. And the more complicated our lives become, the more we're exposed to chaos and misdeeds all around the world, the more we become anxious and paranoid and inclined to believe grand theories that someone behind the curtain is really running things. This paranoia has motivated, throughout history, everything from cults to witch doctory to pogroms and a whole bunch of other very, very bad things. These data are indicative of the fact that we are prone to believing misinformation, almost comically so. I'll give you a fun little example of exactly this. In 2004, a research team in Toronto designed an experiment. They recruited a cohort of participants, half of them younger and half of them older. And they presented them with a series of pretty arcane health statements. There were things like aspirin destroys tooth enamel, corn chips contain twice as much fat as potato chips, and, my favorite, shark fins can treat arthritis. The participants were given these statements, and they were asked to encode each one of them with either true or false. So, false, I think corn chips actually are about the same. False, shark fins don't treat arthritis. True, maybe aspirin does destroy tooth enamel. And they did this a couple times. They logged the answers each time. They kept asking the same questions again and again. Then the researchers gave them the right answers. They told them emphatically, no, shark fins do not treat arthritis. Regardless of what you may have heard, aspirin doesn't destroy tooth enamel, and so on. And they were asked again, rank the statements. And they did better. No, they did a little bit better. Not totally better, but they did a little bit better than the first time. You can see the number of people going from believing the wrong thing to the right thing gets a little bit better over time. But then they did something very clever. They invited all the participants back 3 days later. And they asked them the same questions. Do shark fins treat arthritis? Does aspirin destroy tooth enamel? Participants started repeatedly, constantly misidentifying false statements as true. Some participants went into that study believing that shark fins do not treat arthritis, and they walked away telling researchers that yes, shark fins treat arthritis, despite being told repeatedly it's not true. Researchers found something incredibly troubling. The more often they told the study participants something was false, the more likely they were to accept it as true. Uh-oh. This is the baseline. This is simply how our brains work. We are inclined to believe things are true simply because we keep hearing about them. And obviously, we're hearing a lot of stuff these days. Too much stuff. The increasing complexity of modern life was always going to lead to us believing more misinformation. We are the most well-informed, for good and bad, people to ever exist on this planet. There's too much stuff happening in our heads every single day. That was always going to cause us to believe things that aren't true. This isn't necessarily a big problem. It doesn't really matter if you think the CIA killed JFK, or if the moon landing was fake, so long as it doesn't become an important part of your daily life. I'm not sure how it would, unless you're an astronaut, it might be a problem in that circumstance. But so long as you don't have an emotional investment in that misinformation, it's probably going to be okay. So long as this disinformation, this misinformation, these conspiracy theories don't seep into our politics, we'll probably be fine. But as you can probably tell from the title of this talk, that is what happened. I'm going to go back to a moment in 2006, because we, as humankind, did something very stupid. A company called Facebook, you may have heard of them, they launched something called the news feed. This was really the start of a social internet, one where you weren't just interacting with a group of friends or a small network of like-minded internet denizens. You were thrust into the open internet. Your thoughts, your photos, your beliefs were suddenly accessible to all, and vice versa. The audience for this digital version of yourself grew from dozens to hundreds to thousands to millions to billions over the course of just a few years. Suddenly we found ourselves performing for and being performed to by what feels like every single person on the entire planet. That's a problem to begin with. That makes us a little insecure. In the years that followed, though, Facebook would begin using algorithms to determine what you saw in your newsfeed. They would tinker with the variables that led to a piece of content getting recommended to all of these people, often in unique and weird ways. This was all in service, getting us to use the platform more and more, to get us to click ads, to get us to upload more and more of our lives to Facebook. And they used increasingly sophisticated surveillance systems to make it even more effective. And as they did this, they coaxed on board more news media, politicians, major corporations, government institutions, and so on. And I know we know all this. I'm telling you stuff you already know. That's not why you came out here today. But what I don't think we appreciate, and we're still learning the degree to which, the people who built this system were bewildered and terrified by the thing they were making. They were warning at the time. They were making a Frankenstein's monster. And they were really worried, what it would do to our society. And it was not just Facebook. I'll leave that there for a second. It was not just Facebook. I'm going to focus on Facebook a little bit as the pioneer for this stuff. But it wasn't just that. Facebook, for example, introduced the ability to react to a post. You could click a happy face emoji, crying emoji, an angry emoji, and so on. You could vote with your emotions. While testing out this new voting system, Facebook discovered something very worrying. Content that elicited that red angry face emoji did better with their users than other types of content. This actually doesn't make a lot of sense. In theory, when something makes us angry, we normally want to stop doing it. But Facebook discovered, and this was really by accident, that it would actually make them more likely to engage and, more importantly, to share and engage with each other. Rage ended up becoming infectious on the platform. Now, they had the option of doing the right thing and saying, we're not going to reward that. Even if it keeps people on the platform a little longer, it is not worth it to make our users angry all the time. That's not what they did. They were warned by engineers who were terrified by the consequences of this. They did it anyway. They were told explicitly it would be a very bad idea to use anger as a positive indicator for content. They did it anyway because it made more money. And they also found it was addictive. People would keep doing it. This was the start of something incredibly dangerous. They were stumbling upon a feedback loop enabled by technology they had just designed and they were not yet fully comprehending of. They could not have been happier about this. I'm going to put Facebook aside for just a second because, like I said, it's not just them. They were unleashing and they were discovering the penchant online for anger addiction. But all of us got hooked. In order to succeed online, using anger was more effective than hope or inspiration or even neutrality. And it affected everything. This chart comes from a 2022 study that analyzed the sentiment of newspaper headlines. What it found was right around the time the social internet starts, 2008 or so, maybe a little bit before, these headlines start to experience a rapid and intense emotional shift. This is the general positive to negative trend of newspapers. But they coded it for each individual emotion. Around 2009, neutral goes out the door. Newspaper headlines stop being neutral and indifferent. Sadness becomes pretty popular. Fear, incredibly popular. Joy, a little bit. Disgust, anger. Facebook discovered the trend that people want to be made angry online, and the news media, the bastion of truth and reality, decided to join them in this game. This was, as you can probably guess, bad. Because there was something we hadn't realized quite at that point. Emotion doesn't just make us more likely to engage, it doesn't just make us addicted to the things we do online, it also makes us more likely to believe nonsense. In 2024, a study published in Nature investigated the phenomenon of what they called motivated reasoning. That is, why people decide to believe the things that aren't true. For years, we pursued the idea that people believe in misinformation because they were gullible or ignorant. But these researchers were very clever because they realized that there was something else going on. It wasn't just a lack of education or outright stupidity. That alone could not explain why misinformation had become so popular. They came to realize that people believe in misinformation because they have an emotional investment in it. They want the misinformation to be more true than the truth. The study found that people were actually incredibly good at separating accurate information from misinformation. They actually knew what was true and what was false. But if the misinformation provoked strong emotions, particularly anger, if it was rage-inducing, people were measurably, somewhere between 30 to 60% more likely to share it. I think I have a yes. It was factually false and emotionally true. We can observe this happening from 1,000 kilometers up. A 2018 study from the Massachusetts Institutes of Technology found that after crunching the numbers on 126,000 news articles, fake news, misinformation, was shared 70% more often and spread 6 times faster than real and verifiable news. Even if you don't use social media, you can't escape these effects. Because over the years, we uploaded more and more stuff to the internet. Our politics, our media, our culture, our interpersonal connections, we as a society opted to become a more online species. You could opt out of the internet, but you couldn't opt out of this new digital society we were creating. You could still read the newspaper and maybe get those neutral headlines in print, but as soon as you go to their website, you're going to get hit with that same anger that has made us so addicted to things like Facebook. Over time, this spread to everywhere else. Twitter, the billionaire-owned platform beloved by politicians and journalists everywhere, has become a hodgepodge of extremism, conspiracy theories, health, pseudoscience, and a haven for the proclivities of its owner, who has no problem twisting the algorithm to promote his own paranoid ideology. TikTok, owned by the Chinese government, has mastered the ability, even better than Facebook, to get people, users, particularly youth, addicted. They're emotionally invested in the platform. And like I said, this has poisoned everything else. Lies and misinformation that percolate online seep into our discourse and into our politics and into our streets. The Freedom Convoy in 2022, also the 4-year anniversary of that, occupied Ottawa for 3 weeks, fed on pseudoscience about the vaccine and COVID-19, largely downloaded from Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and other platforms. Political parties across Europe, such as Rassemblement National in France, Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, and Reform in the UK, they feed on this anger and misinformation fomenting online. We know that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, amongst others, are both customers and suppliers of these kinds of lies. I'm going to talk a little bit about how bad actors weaponize these lies in a minute. But I want to talk a little bit more about us, people who want to live in the truth and yet don't. Because we, like it or not, are helping to perpetuate this problem. We've done it before. I've been thinking a lot recently about the USSR, and there's a book that I've come across that I've become absolutely obsessed with. I think it's one of the most important works ever written to describe about how we're prone to living in misinformation, prone to living in lies. It's called Everything Was Forever Until It Was No More. And it's written by a Russian-born anthropologist named Alexei Yurchak. In the book, he investigates why citizens of the Soviet Union came to accept a state that seemed to be built entirely on incoherencies and contradictions, built on lies. The citizenry of the Soviet Union had come to accept that they lived in an anti-colonial empire. It's a contradiction in terms. They were living in an international, cosmopolitan nation of nations whose subjects were expressly forbidden from leaving. They were a brotherhood of nations, but one where all the siblings would need to feed Russia and would be invaded if they ever refused. After the end of the Cold War, many experts still believed the idea that the system perpetuated itself thanks to the KGB and mass brainwashing. But Yurchak had a different idea. He observed that at least after the death of Stalin, the Soviet system seemed to continue operating not despite the objections of Soviet citizens, but with their help. He called this late socialism. Czech dissident Václav Havel noted this trend as well, and you may have heard this anecdote recently coming from our Prime Minister. He observed how shopkeepers knew the state was stealing from them. He observed how shopkeepers knew the system they participated in was falling apart. And yet every day, they went to the window and they put up a sign that said, "Workers of the world unite." They were lying to themselves, and they were lying to each other, and they were participating in a system that was based on lies. Yurchak offers a different anecdote that I'm really fond of. Kind of an unrelated quote, but I'll come back to that in a second. Yurchak offers a story about a minor party official in Leningrad named Marta. It had been her job to look after the party's official portrait of Leonid Brezhnev. I'm not sure that this is exactly it, but something similar to that. And it was difficult to look after this portrait because over his years as premier, he was constantly being awarded with new medals, honors, and prizes that he had supposedly earned during the Great Patriotic War. And every time he awarded himself a new recognition, it was Marta's job to update his portrait to match. She did this at night so it would seem as though nothing had ever changed. Yurchak writes, even though the presence of an additional medal on Brezhnev's suit was publicly known, this fact was symbolically represented in terms of immutability rather than in change. That is to say, everyone had to pretend like those medals had always been there, even as it got absurd and bizarre. Okay, increasingly absurd and bizarre report. This is clearly fake, by the way. I found this online and I had a really good laugh at it. This is absolutely not real. But Yurchak calls this hyper-normalization. By putting lies in their shop window or by walking past this portrait of Brezhnev without saying, hey, he didn't have those medals yesterday, the Soviet body politic was allowing the lie to continue. They did this because they believed the Soviet system was better than the chaos that may replace it. This is motivated reasoning. Another Russian scholar, Mikhail Epstein, no relation, calls the consequence of this widespread lying hyper-reality. Yes, the Soviet state spewed propaganda, it spied on dissidents, and it crushed attempts at democracy. But the vast majority of citizens in the Soviet Union were not dissidents. They did not want democracy. They repeated the slogans because they couldn't imagine a world where they didn't. And it wasn't until that system really began falling apart at the seams that they began to imagine something better. But it is true that this system of hyper-normalization and hyper-reality required a state that controlled all facets of power. Mass media, however, has made it more and more possible to create that system without totalitarianism. Vladimir Putin created a system of imitation democracy, as Dmitry Furman calls it, thanks to his ability to control and weaponize newspapers, radio, and TV. But the internet has made this possible on a whole other level. Because as I explained, the internet was quickly making us angry and paranoid. It was motivating us to consume and share lies. And rather than fix these problems, companies like Facebook opted to make it even worse. They opted to monetize this anger and this lying. They opted to cash in on this new hyper-reality we were all building. Rather than disengage, regular people committed further. We spent more and more of our time online, as did our politicians, our pundits, our journalists, I'm including myself in this, actors, musicians, and so on. We thought, if only we could be better online, if only we could share more fact checks, better journalism, maybe the truth would win out. Maybe we could compete with this lying and come out ahead. It was a matter of time before someone realized the power of the system we had created and decided to weaponize it, as the USSR had done with its party papers and Putin had done with his loyal TV networks. Oh, dramatic. I know this text is absolutely impossible to read. I'm going to read you some of it in a second. This comes from an email sent in 2019. It was a Facebook employee who had gotten a call from a political apparatchik in Europe. Afterwards, they wrote this email to their fellow engineers. They wrote, engagement on positive and policy posts has been severely reduced, leaving political parties increasingly reliant on inflammatory posts and direct attacks on their competitors. This was following that anger and rage-inducing encouragement that the algorithm had given. This engineer writes, many parties, including those that have shifted strongly to the negative, worry about the long-term effects on democracy. Like I said earlier, I think about that sketch from the Moscow apartment bombings a lot, but I think about this quote in this email way more. It is a recognition happening internally from Facebook and from right-wing misinformation peddlers in Europe that they were building a system that was going to destroy democracy. And what did they do? They kept going. In the ensuing years, these politicians discovered the same thing that Facebook had learned. Whipping up rage worked really well online. Whatever the long-term consequences for democracy, they clearly didn't care because it worked. It raised money, it raised votes, and it gave them political power. What these politicians also learned is that nothing gins up rage more than a feeling of being manipulated. more than a feeling of being taken advantage of. Nothing whipped up anger more than conspiracy theories. Now, conspiracy theories are not new in politics, but in the past, they followed a pretty meticulous and careful path to power that usually didn't work. A few crackpots, for example, invented the idea that Hillary and Bill Clinton were responsible for a string of murders. They called it the Clinton body count. It percolated in word of mouth, on weird arcane newsletters, on shortwave radio. It finally broke into the big time when it got published in a Wall Street gossip column, and then was run on the Rush Limbaugh show. We all remember Rush Limbaugh. Before long, it was a fixation of certain members of Congress. But this conspiracy theory, like many other conspiracies like it, ran into the same problem. The media, which people still trusted for truth. Pundits and certain papers might entertain this nonsense, but ultimately, the major sources of factual knowledge in the world, in America in particular, from newspapers to the evening news, to the history books, watchdog reports, and government leaflets, would come to the consensus on reality. That no, Bill and Hillary Clinton didn't kill a bunch of people. And we abided by that. We trusted them. We, the gatekeepers, I'm talking about myself in particular here, control the systems of truth and validity in society. And those politicians and Facebook and a raft of other players all decided that our monopoly on the system had gone on for far too long. Some did so more aggressively than others. A whole network of websites popped up to create and share ideas and theories that weren't being addressed by the media or the powers that be. These websites had names like Gab, 4chan, 8chan, Parler, Getter, Rumble, BitChute, Locals, Telegram. If you know more than one of those, I'm sorry for you. That, like Facebook, they all learned that rage sells. And smart actors discovered that these sites were incredible places to seed ideas that had been blocked or debunked by the mainstream press. And in so doing, they could directly challenge, subvert, supplant, and replace the media's role as gatekeepers of knowledge and truth. And in turn, we often help them. Let me tell you a little story. About a decade ago, I became a drinking buddy with a guy named Kirill Kalinin. He was, at least according to his business card, the press attaché for the Russian embassy in Ottawa. Between friends, he was a spy. More accurately, I suppose, he may have called himself an information officer, or what I would say, a disinformation officer. Kalinin was really good at getting certain ideas to percolate online. He tried to sell them to the mainstream press, but didn't really seem super committed. I remember he once tried to sell me on the idea that the Euromaidan movement had all been orchestrated by the CIA. Not just that this was not a fight for democracy at all. The heavenly 100 heroes, those killed fighting for Ukraine's sovereignty and democracy, he said, had actually been killed by their own side. There were snipers hanging out on the rooftops that were paid for by these democratic activists, he said. I knew, of course, this was untrue. We all knew this was untrue. Thanks to good investigative reporting, even ballistic studies, we know this is false. But for people motivated to believe that the CIA is the ultimate source of evil, or that Russia is just a misunderstood good guy, or that the media, the gatekeepers, lie, well, you can find an endless supply of things to not just confirm your view, but to confirm the idea that they are keeping this truth from you. This is just a tiny cross-section of a terrible peer-reviewed paper, that completely garbage YouTube videos, The Daily Skeptic, which is maybe my favorite name for a fake news outlet ever, and a raft of other websites would tell you all about how the media was lying to you about what really happened that day. Now, Kalinin was eventually banned from Canada and sent home, but you don't need the Russians to see these lies. You didn't need Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Internet Research Agency to convince Americans to be angry and distrustful and to vote for Donald Trump in 2016, or again in 2020, or again in 2024. We are awfully good at producing this misinformation ourselves. Consider, unfortunately, COVID-19. I'm sorry for bringing you back to the pandemic. I really do genuinely apologize. I'm sure you remember there was a total endemic paranoia about where the virus came from, whether the vaccines were safe, who was really calling the shots behind the scenes, what did Bill Gates really want? The official consensus, as you probably know, is that COVID-19 spilled over from bats to some other mammals before infecting humans, that the virus was deadly, the vaccine saved millions of lives, that these assertions are backed up by an enormous amount of scientific data and other evidence. You could argue with maybe a couple of those conclusions, but there was a reasonable conversation. But on the internet, a growing body of online users that spilled over more and more to the real world, they came to a whole grandiose meta-theory of everything. They said all of these official conclusions weren't just wrong, they were lies. They said there had been a massive conspiracy, ranging from the Pentagon to a British NGO to the Chinese Communist Party, Anthony Fauci, Pfizer, Moderna, the public health bureaucracy, the media, and so on. They'd all gotten together. They colluded to design COVID-19 as a bioweapon, to release it, to cover it up. There was no one person building this idea. It was not a press attaché from the Ottawa embassy, the Russian embassy in Ottawa rather. It was a collaborative effort. There was hundreds, maybe thousands, even tens of thousands of people in these online spaces who were workshopping new iterations of this idea. They were identifying new players, new scientists, new grants, new bits of evidence to construct this narrative, this pandemic, this society-altering catastrophe was no mistake, it was all planned. And groups started popping up to help create this work, to help popularize it, to get it on social media, on the alternative media, the alternative to truth media. There were groups like Biosafety Now and Children's Health Defense. You can't argue with Children's Health Defense, can you? We all want to defend children. And then, of course, in 2022, 4 years ago now, Russia invades Ukraine. You better believe they found a way to work that into this grand theory. There's a guy in rural Virginia. His name is Jacob Creech. That's him there. He goes by Clandestine online. It's a very cool name. He's a manager of a wine bar in rural Virginia, and he posits a theory online. What if Russia invaded Ukraine because there were American bioweapons labs on Ukrainian soil? Maybe they were making the next version of COVID-19. He finds proof that American agencies were funding biological research in Ukraine and that they were doing so to make this COVID-19 2.0. He called them biolabs. Fauci was in on it. That's with the CIA and China and everybody else. This idea keeps widening. This wasn't a conspiracy of a few people. It involved a crazy mess of acronyms, the CDC, the NIAID, USAID, I can go down a whole list. It involves the University of North Carolina at that point. We laughed at these people. It was all so crazy and so improbable that anyone would believe this complete nonsense. We debunked it. YouTube and Facebook added flags telling users it was all a lie. Institutions and responsible politicians declared it misinformation. And then, it became more true than the truth. It became ubiquitous amongst people who were amassing more and more political power. And we all had to go around, day by day, just accepting that people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump Jr. would become, in the Russian government, would regain power while using these conspiracy theories to whip up and motivate their base. And that there was a network of platforms and new media organizations that would parrot these ideas to millions of people. And we had to accept that somewhere around 30% of the population, both in the US and Canada, believed in this. It took people like RFK Jr. to weaponize this idea really effectively, but it took Donald Trump to use it, the lie of the 2020 election, the lie that vaccines cause autism, the lie that Joe Biden is part of a deep state, the lie that Anthony Fauci wanted to kill a bunch of people, the lie that the World Economic Forum is secretly running the show. All of these lies, he used these lies to regain political power. And he used this system we had built to do it. The Make America Great Again movement is not successful despite becoming synonymous with this misinformation, but because it is synonymous with this misinformation. Their success is not in proving their worth or addressing real issues, but in how effectively they can convince people to live in a lie. From this, they have grown movements whose only identifying feature is an unwavering, absolute belief in misinformation. Like voters in the Soviet Union who would trudge to the polls to elect the members of the Congress of People's Deputies, the misinformation becomes a function of belonging to a movement, of living in a state. And they are in turn reshaping the world in their image. That includes Facebook, that includes Fox News, that includes a whole bunch of institutions, apparatuses, and organizations that we once used to turn to for truth. And it's not just Donald Trump. Viktor Orban, Marine Le Pen, Nigel Farage, sometimes Pierre Poilievre, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, they all understand to varying degrees how social platforms can be leveraged to promote misinformation and create new ideas to help their political movements. They did so effectively, they have poisoned the entire information ecosystem we all increasingly rely on. And despite this, we keep putting our signs in the window. We keep using Facebook. We keep letting Google and now ChatGPT be our sources of truth. Whether it's the Haitians are eating cats and dogs in Springfield, remember that one? Or Ukraine's a Nazi state with a cache of bioweapons, or there's an international conspiracy of Jewish bankers, these conspiracy theories have all become tools to reinforce power. And the platforms on which they spread have become ubiquitous to our daily lives, despite being force multipliers for the efficacy and popularity of these nonsense conspiracy theories. Shouldn't put so much text on screen. This is far too small. This is a brief snapshot of the mass adoption of misinformation on major tech platforms. Show it to you later if you like. All right, that is the end of the truly depressing part of the talk. Now we're getting to somewhat less depressing territory. I'm going to try to keep the last part somewhat brief because I think it would be better to talk about solutions and remedies, conversation, as opposed to a lecture. But I do want to say that there are things we need to stop believing in, as much as we want them to work. There are so many experts out there who will tell you that if we just really commit to better moderation on these platforms, or if we just get a little more fact-checking done, or if we can do a little deplatforming for some of these bad actors, maybe we can get the Canadian press to do more debunks of these bad stories. Maybe we can win the fight against misinformation. I'm a heretic in this regard because I don't think there was any utility to these strategies. The data certainly suggests that there were not. If there were any utility to them, it's far too late to implement them now. The horse is out of the barn. There are some other soft, interpersonal approaches that seem to be netting results that, based on some good research, might actually help convince people to get away from living in a lie. One of these is called the jiu-jitsu approach to persuasion, my favorite. It's an approach pioneered by some very smart academics in Australia who argue that you can't browbeat people into the truth. That no matter how many times you tell somebody that shark fins do not treat arthritis, or that the Euromaidan protest was not a CIA coup d'etat, people are going to keep winding up in the wrong spot. If anything, the more you repeat it, the more likely they may be to wind up in the wrong spot. These researchers argue we're trying to solve for the wrong thing. They actually argue that we kind of need to take some lessons from these conspiracy theorists. They argue that jiu-jitsu needs to be our inspiration. In jiu-jitsu, if you don't know, much like judo, which Vladimir Putin's very fond of, you use your opponent's body weight against them. These researchers argue that understanding the values, concerns, fears, and hopes of people who believe in misinformation is a very useful way of tailoring a message, a counter-message, to them. We basically, they suggest, need to motivate their reasoning towards the truth. They tried this out in a study with a large cohort of anti-vaxxers. These people did not trust vaccines for many reasons. Some of them hated needles. Some people just didn't trust the government. But one of the biggest factors they found was a distrust of big pharma. So these researchers decided to propose an alternative into debunking this opposition. They suggested they should lean in. They should say, yeah, you know what, you're right. There is a conspiracy afoot. Pharma companies want to keep you sick. They'd rather sell you the drugs once you're sick than vaccinate you to prevent the illness in the first place. That's why, if you really want to stick it to big pharma, you go out and get vaccinated. You stay healthy. It's a pretty cute thought experiment, and they actually found it worked. People were more likely to support vaccines once they had their concerns validated. Bit of a cute thought experiment, admittedly. But it does suggest that instead of decrying misinformation, we should lean in and say, okay, I hear you, I share your concerns, but have you thought about this? You're anti-war? I'm anti-war. You know who's the most anti-war of all? Ukraine. Might not work every time, but it might work some of the time. Now, here's the downside to this. It requires really long, intense conversations. And if I can bring us back again, unfortunately, to the internet, the World Wide Web does not encourage those slow, analytical conversations. It might work in reasoning with your paranoid uncle over Thanksgiving dinner, but it probably won't help us combat RFK Jr., Kirill Kalinin, or Jacob Creech. In fact, it seems like nothing works on the scale of the internet, because we built an internet that is prone to misinformation. Companies grew fat on lies and became addicted to anger. Politicians became addicts themselves, refashioning themselves into something darker, nastier, and more paranoid than ever before. And they did this all while building out a system that we all rely on every single day. There's a half-decent chance that you've heard about this event on Facebook. We could tomorrow nuke all of the information off the internet. We could blanket the earth in advertisements warning of misinformation's corrosive effects. We could criminalize misinformation outright and mandate that social media companies take all lies offline. This would not work. Bad actors would generate new misinformation twice as fast as we could take it offline. Their fellow travelers would repeat it and share it readily, perhaps even more enthusiastically. These advertisements would become proof of a conspiracy. New social media companies would spring up, headquartered in the Bahamas, defying all of these orders. So what do? Step one is we have to accept that we did this. This is not someone else's fault. This is our fault. We collectively spent a generation uploading our politics, our media, our national discourse to the internet. Then we allowed a small cadre of incredibly powerful and morally empty corporations to take full control of it. Truth cannot win today on Facebook, Twitter, or TikTok any more than it can on Fox News or Vika Talk Day, because the game is rigged. And realizing that is kind of liberating. If we want to win the next battle, particularly in the English-speaking West, it needs to be with a recognition that we need to stage a tactical retreat. We need, yes, high-quality journalism that speaks to people's values and emotions. We need institutions that provide motivation for people to fight for the truth. We need politicians who resist the urge to participate in this lunacy, and we need voters who punish them if they do. It is possible to build this system on the internet, but it will require us to reject the system we have now. That would mean getting off the oligarch platforms of Facebook and Twitter, and instead prioritizing alternatives, things that are more community-driven, platforms that have an interest in telling the truth and not exploiting anger for profit. This is not entirely wacky. These platforms already exist. One of the biggest social media networks on the internet is called Reddit, and it is based on community-level management. Others, like Blue Sky, are trying this on a bigger scale. There's one coming that's going to be Canadian-specific called Gander that may yet work. But fundamentally, we also need to recognize the internet is not built to tell the truth. We need to get better at having human-to-human conversations. We need more third spaces like this one. I know I don't need to lecture this audience because you're here, but there is a world outside of our phones and our laptops. We need to encourage other people to realize that too. The simple fact is that our politics and our world are increasingly reliant on people who interpret reality through the internet. We need them to unplug from that system that is making them angry and crazy. That's not just the youth, that's not just older folks, that's our politicians more and more. I tell you, I know these people, they spend too much time on Twitter. We need trust again. We need a shared sense of purpose and self that extends beyond these madness-inducing platforms. Last part of my talk, coming back to Ukraine. There are a few places in the world that have figured this out, and one of them, while not being perfect, is Ukraine. Yes, in Ukraine there are still some less than stellar TV stations, some bad radio stations. Yes, many Ukrainians rely way too much on Telegram, which is a terrible platform. Yes, there is an innate paranoia that goes to the Ukrainian psyche, just like every psyche of every nationality on the earth, maybe more so the Americans, but the reality is crisis and chaos have a real ability to focus the mind. And solidarity can become a kryptonite to division and anxiety. In the 4 years since the full-scale invasion began, I think we can safely say that Ukraine is winning the information war. And they're winning it because they're not reliant on this system that makes us angry, crazy, paranoid, and that pushes us to live in a lie. But the biggest threat to Ukraine is not the resiliency of the Ukrainian people, or lack of resiliency amongst the Ukrainian people. It's not that they're going to suddenly start believing Russian mis and disinformation. No, the biggest threat is that we, the Canadians, Europeans, the Japanese, are going to fall like the Americans into paranoia and conspiracy theories, distrust and cynicism. Because we have already lost. The question is, how badly did we lose, and how are we going to do in the next battle? We're going to lose again if we keep playing on enemy turf. But there is hope that we can win the war, but we need to first retreat back into reality. Thank you. All right. Like I said, really hoping the last bit could be a little more of a conversation as well. So if you have any questions, comments, or anything, I'd love to hear them. Let's start over here.
What's been happening on Wikipedia?
Ooh,
Because it's kind of a, it's different.
that's a great question. It tries to be an encyclopedia of everything we could conceivably know about the world, and that is dizzying. And it opens to a lot of, I think, skirmishes about what is really true and what is not. Obviously, there's some accuracy problems with it that, maybe are unavoidable, that would not come, let's say, from a professional organization like Encyclopedia Britannica. So it's tough. There are people out there, people who love doing their own research, right? Conspiracy crew, who go to Wikipedia and cherry pick bits of information because they have all the information of history available to them. Every conspiracy that proved to be true, every single politician who was mysteriously assassinated or whatever. And I think for them it becomes a useful way of assembling the conspiracy theories. I mean, I don't know what you do about that. But I do know that Wikipedia, like I said, is this model for something better, right? One that we all contribute to, that we all have stake in, that we can all trust and rely on, because it's built by other people who want to seek the truth. What's happening with it? By and large, I think it's going pretty well. They're always asking you for money. They don't really actually need it, but whatever. They're also trying to fund their, most of the reason they're asked. I'm rambling because it's a really good question. I hadn't actually totally thought through it, but I'm thinking through it now. Through their foundation, they also do sponsor a bunch of fora, of organizations, of groups that do various other kind of online internet governance stuff, which I think is really great and important. There were some folks who are constantly, there's actually a guy who calls himself one of the founders of Wikipedia. Again, a little parable about how the internet makes people crazy. This guy had been one of them, said he had an early role in Wikipedia, who kind of got booted out of the organization, who now aggressively tells the world that it's owned by the CIA. Part of the reason that Elon Musk has built out his own Wikipedia competitor, Grokpedia, is in part because he has been convinced that the CIA secretly runs Wikipedia. So, one other illustration of how we're all losing our minds. I think that's probably it, but thanks for bringing up Wikipedia.
Have you looked at Grokpedia? Because I ran into it sideways when Google sent me an alert that I apparently have a Grokpedia.
Yeah, I got the same alert.
And it's just this weird hodgepodge of cut and paste.
Yeah.
Every press release that's ever had my name on it in the last 20 years.
That's right. It's basically an LLM feeding, because it doesn't have users contributing to it. Again, there's this, I really don't delve into AI so much in this talk, because I think it is really just the acceleration of all of the trends I talk about. The idea that the media and the state and government and NGOs, institutions are so unreliable and so nefarious that we needed to build a technology that would give us an alternative to them is basically the ethos behind ChatGPT, or at least the mass adoption of it. And Grokpedia is that. It's basically, Wikipedia is run by people who are bad and evil and owned by the CIA, trust this black box technology that will build out a thing of real, earnest truth, and it's going to be so easy to manipulate. Right here, yeah.
I had a question about, and I'd like your thoughts on this. We talked a lot about Alberta separatism, but there is obviously also a Saskatchewan separatist movement. I feel like because Saskatchewan is smaller, less important in the national media, what's happening in Saskatchewan with the campaign of disinformation and political manipulation around separatism is like kind of not being talked about. So I'm curious about like if you have any thoughts about like the disinformation campaign behind the separatist movement, and what we can be doing in terms of like countering that. I've seen a big change online in Saskatchewan. Like in 2017, we had a very successful urban rural campaign to save the public library that was all online because of like the rural part of Saskatchewan, and it was very successful. I don't think today, the way the algorithms are set, we could do it again. So I'm just curious about like, you know, your thoughts about like how Facebook has changed as a like organizing tool and like this whole issue of separatism in terms of disinformation.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I can't imagine that Saskatchewan separatism is going to work because, you know, obviously in Alberta they have Wexit, but you have to call your Sexit, but I don't think sorry, that's a different
They're very well.
No, I had no, I'm being cute, but you know, listen, I live in Quebec. We have our own separatism problem to deal with. At a certain point, yes, the internet and online misinformation is feeding the grievances there. But also, you know, movements like these, mass movements, which are increasingly in person. I mean, if you watch videos or you can engage with, whether it's the folks out in Alberta, whether it's the folks here in Saskatchewan, they're doing something very smart that their critics are not doing as effectively. They're renting town halls, they're renting halls, they're renting public spaces and bringing people out. They're creating physical community. Maybe they're using Facebook or Twitter or whatever to get people there, but once they're there, they're creating IRL, in-person movements. And I think that is something you can look to basically every kind of paranoid populist, right-wing movement over the last 10 years. They all do so very effectively. What was Donald Trump's most effective tactic in 2024? It was not so much Twitter, it was rallies. It was getting people out, getting people motivated. Sure, the internet was the initial sell, but bringing them out into the meat space, as we call it, is the thing that gets them actually feeling like a sense of community. You don't combat that by fighting misinformation, the initial misinformation vectors that get them there. You combat that by bringing either them or people like them out into physical spaces and creating that third space, that political organization in real life again. I do think there probably is a value for partisans of the truth or people who don't want to separate or whatever to use the internet to instigate those movements, those organizations, those rallies, those meetings, those town halls, whatever. But it can't be the end point. I hope over the next 5 years we figure out online spaces that are non-algorithmic, that are not Facebook, that are localized to do this. My dream would be that if you want to use the internet for political organizing, that you go to SaskatchewanSocial.ca, the Saskatchewan thing that social media that only encompasses the citizens of this province. Because at a certain point, there was a warning that basically happened in 1998 or so that basically said, there was a bunch of internet engineers that basically said, trying to create a system for the entire world is going to make us crazy. What we need is local. Both local and issue specific, right? Maybe if you're a big fan of, Friday Night Lights, you go to the Friday, this is a weirdly dated football TV reference, but you go to the Friday Night Lights forum, you chat with fellow fans of Friday Night Lights about Friday Night Lights. Great. If you want to talk about political organizing in Saskatchewan, you go to a platform just for political organizing in Saskatchewan or for social wits or whatever. The idea that we have to put everything on this massive platform that is prone to foreign interference, is prone to lying, that is manipulated by some offices in San Francisco, I think it's a dead end. But also, part of my answer is I don't know. I'm the journalist, right? I'm the one here to sort of sit on the sidelines and tell you what you're doing wrong. But figuring out how to do it right is the job of political organizers, community activists, people who want to build things that bring people out and get them motivated. I'm just sort of here to, like I said, sit on the sidelines. Yeah, right.
Why isn't polyethylene doing that? The rage that's the theory, the rage, the incitement to think like angrily.
That's his whole feed. The liberal feed is not at that level of rage. Why is he Paul ever out incarnate with this rage message?
It answers the question. Well, listen, you know, I talk to conservatives a lot. I used to know Polyev a little bit. I know folks around him. You know, they have a theory about how they run their movement over the last number of years, which is basically, and something that Jason Kenney sort of tried in Alberta and others have tried, which is basically to say, if we cannot keep our party together, we risk having what happened in the UK, in France, and elsewhere, which is that this sort of this online-fed movement becomes so powerful, so so motivated, with so much momentum behind them that they overtake our party as the voice of conservatism and of the kind of reactionary opposition to the decline of Western civilization, right? And to give him credit, he kind of threaded the needle there. I mean, he has basically vanquished Maxime Bernier's People's Party, which is that in a nutshell, right? He has cannibalized that party, brought them into the conservative fold. He did so, like I said, with some use of conspiracy theories in some cases, of tipping his hat towards misinformation narratives. They think they're riding the dragon, so to speak, and there's an argument to be made that they are, right? I mean, they've managed to bring in a bunch of people who are really disaffected with the state and the way things are going, and they've tried to do so in a productive way. I don't agree with why they've done that or how they've done that, but you kind of have to acknowledge that Canada has fared pretty well when you put us next to the UK, the US, France, Germany, everywhere else. Yes, we have a conservative party that plays in the space a little bit, but has not gone down the same path of demonizing all immigrants, not gone down the same path of whipping up hatred against trans people, at least not to the same degree. Tiny victories.
You're in Saskatchewan and Alberta now. We have trans people to that degree.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Point taken.
That would actually be a useful thing if we can convince some of these people who are so addicted to rage that maybe the air in Poland makes you trans.
That's fine. I mean, listen, and it's a fine line we're walking, and it's very easy to fall off the edge. Why isn't it more effective? Like I said at the end, crisis, existential threats have a real ability to focus the mind. And I think, one thing I was following Pierre Poilievre around the last election. I was on Mark Carney's campaign plane, talking to random people across the country. A lot of people would say, listen, I was going to vote for Pierre Poilievre, and given everything, I just can't vote for somebody who's dallying around with all this nonsense, given the degree of threat we face. I think Pierre Poilievre is realizing that as well. We'll see where that goes. Yes. Well,
Thanks. Justin, your thesis seems to be that we, the masses, are manipulated by technology that predates on our worst psychology and instincts. So my question is, where do you think hope lies? And I present the question as a double entendre, that maybe hope has to lie.
Yeah.
And so much as we value the truth, that the solution may be to adopt the techniques, not the mentality of the opposition.
Here is the baseline. We cannot keep using the internet like this and thinking we're going to get better results. That's an old definition of insanity, continuing to do the same thing and hoping for something different. There is no world in which we can have a functional society, at least on a local, provincial, national level, that is fundamentally uploaded to systems that don't exist, are not based in this country, and they're not owned and operated by us, right? Facebook. I'll keep coming back to Facebook, but like I said, this is also true for how Google serves you truth. Now, for how ChatGPT serves you truth, and I'm saying truth with air quotes here. The degree and frequency with which they change the system that gives you truth, or recommends you events, or shares news with you, or in Facebook's case, does not share news with you, the degree to which they change them without knowing the consequences of it is mind-boggling. They do not tell you when they change the algorithm. They do not tell you when they start rewarding anger and deprioritizing neutrality. So there's a Facebook engineer whose name is Francis Howard. He actually now works at McGill University in Montreal. She was an engineer at Facebook. She was one of the ones screaming, we're doing something very bad. And she resigned in protest. Not only that, she resigned with thousands of pages of documents. The emails that I showed you earlier come from her. What she showed was this constant tinkering that was happening without any thought to the downstream effects of it. If we continue relying on those platforms, we're never going to win. Because they're going to keep changing the rules of the game as we're trying to play it. I don't see a world in which, I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but particularly young people, but not just young people, are increasingly spending upwards of 5, 6, 7 hours a day on the social internet. So not just watching videos, not just reading Wikipedia, but engaging back and forth with people under rules they don't understand, that are not transparent at all. I don't see a world in which we get out of these problems while that continues to happen elsewhere. I forgot to advance to the last slide. It's basically a thank you. I don't see a world where that happens. Now, the question of, do we lie better? I would twist that slightly and say, we could get better at telling stories, but I don't think that's going to solve it either. So here, I'll pull back the curtain of journalism right now a little bit and tell you that every single newspaper in Canada is having a crisis. And for the first time in a long time, it's not a crisis of money, thank God, but it's a crisis of distribution. We don't know how to get people to read our stuff anymore. And if we do get them to read our stuff, it's an article a day. It used to be, everyone here remembers, there's no actual severely young people in the room, everyone remembers when someone would show up and throw a bundle of dead trees at your doorstep, and that would be your source of truth for the day. And sit, maybe you wouldn't read every single article, but you'd read 5 or 6 or 7 articles from the newspaper, often from voices you recognize and trust. That's no longer the system we live in. We're now reliant on third parties to give you the articles we write. And it's often a black box as to how they decide to do them. Things like Apple News, somewhat better. Google News has actually started deprioritizing journalism content and suggesting instead AI summaries of journalism, which are often terrible. Facebook, as we know, does not allow you to access news. Twitter deprioritizes major mainstream news outlets. So then it becomes, how do we get people to read the news? We don't. We don't have a solution for that right now. If we want to tell stories better, we want to get people invested in the truth, we need to find a new way of doing that, and we don't have it right now. So I like the idea of, how do we outcompete, but we just don't have the distribution method to do so right now.
Isn't that because people are too cheap? I mean,
Yes, I think so.
I'm the only person on my block who gets 2 newspapers, and everybody calls me to see if somebody died. So, it seems to me before everybody had the newspaper. Now I talk to people at my work, and they don't have the newspaper at all. They all rely on this. So, and then my second point is you're on Bug Guide, and I actually follow you, but that's all opinion as well, right? Like the Substack is not what I call news.
No.
So it seems kind of contradictory because in one sense I am actually following you, not that I knew who you were, but some of your articles were interesting. So it seems that I'm also following people that maybe aren't telling the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, again, this is not, we're not in an ideal situation. If I had it my way, we would go back to everyone paying for a newspaper to arrive on their doorstep. If I had it my way, opinion would be and listen, I'm a columnist, right? This is somewhat hypocritical, but the reality is we learned many years ago that opinion does better online than a lot of actual journalism does. So I've tried to pursue a path of doing journalism through columnizing, right? My opinion's in there, right? Try as much as I can to talk to people, to read studies, read a lot of studies, as you can probably tell, to try and do the journalism and then package it in a way that people will actually read. But no, this is, again, a crisis. Substack, which is where my newsletter is hosted, is a real hodgepodge. There's a bunch of really great journalists on there who are doing original work. There's an outlet called The Hatchet, which does really fascinating long-form investigative audio journalism. Paul Wells is on there, who I think is one of the best political columnists in the country. But there's also a lot of complete bullshit, right? Like, there's a lot of misinformation and lies on Substack as well. And again, if there is a great alternative, we haven't figured it out yet. And when I keep saying we, are part of the problem. I'm including myself in that, right? Like I'm including myself in the fact that we're all participating in a system that isn't working, and we don't have a great exit for it yet. But it's going to have to require us to spend less time online, which again, this room is doing. We're here, we're living the truth to some degree, yeah.
Oh, a short question.
Yeah.
Do you have threats and other investigative journalists, and how do you deal with them if you do?
Yeah, I mean, that is the other kind of reality of the internet. It's very easy to say you want to kill somebody. It's very easy to say, I'm going to find out where you live, I'm going to show up at your doorstep and take your family out, right? And it happens all the time. I don't get it all that often. I get it sometimes. But it also kind of requires realizing that the internet is full of people who aren't just engaging in lies, who live in a place of like unreality, right? And it's very unlikely that those people are going to follow through. It would require them getting off the computer long enough to come and follow through on the threat, which it's tough. It actually is really affecting people's mental health, and that is one aspect of all of this that I didn't even touch on. But mental health is an aspect of this. When I keep saying the internet makes us crazy, I'm being a bit cute. It genuinely does affect the mental health of many people who use it. The shooting in BC from just last week seems to be an instance of an individual who basically dropped out of school and spent their days online talking to ChatGPT in some cases about planning to shoot up a school, spending too much time watching horrendous videos, poisoning their brain, worsening their existing mental health problems. This is a problem we see happen on a huge scale. The problem of violent extremism is tied very closely into this. The prevalence of conspiracy theories compounds this, it's related to this. Mental health, it is not just that the platforms are monetizing us, it's not just that we're monetizing our anger, it's not just the politicians that are exploiting it, it's also that it is changing our brain psychology to some degree, right? We are becoming angrier and more paranoid, more distrustful because we spend so much time in front of a screen where we think we're interacting with real people and we're largely not. So that the threat angle of that is, I think, very, very closely tied. We're here in the back.
How do you do your own fact check? Like, what is the procedure? Like before summarizing some information and supply people to us, how do you do fact check?
Yeah, I mean, I've told colleagues this, that I really actually hate that we've gotten really obsessed with this phrase fact-checking. Because fact-checking is, so journalists do fact-checking in everything we do. That is the point of the job, right? The point is to go find facts and then start kicking at them to see if they hold up. And then if you can, to string them together, put them in the newspaper or on the evening news or whatever in a way that tells a story, right? That is the essence of journalism. Fact-checking is a job that exists on top of that unfortunately is becoming scarcer and scarcer in newsrooms these days. But it is the job of an editor to go through those facts and say, is this the right spelling of that name? Is this the right year when this happened? Is this the right so on and so on? So it's a process, right? Like it is an institutional process that tries to deliver the best possible products to people who want to read what we do. Now, part of the problem is, years ago we called it citizen journalism. We've had a bunch of different names for it since then. We kind of settled on independent or alternative journalism. The problem with that system is that it's often run by people who don't appreciate the process of fact-checking or fact-gathering or fact-verifying, right? Here's a great little example. A couple days ago, actually about a week ago, the US government releases this whole tranche of Epstein files, right? Shows a bunch of very nefarious stuff. Journalists are still going through these. There are millions of pages. They're still meticulously going page by page and saying, okay, is the person sending this email the same person I think is, okay, did this meeting really happen? And it's this very painstaking effort to make sure that the person you're writing about is in fact the person who was involved in these emails, to make sure that you're not accusing innocent people of doing misdeeds. A woman goes on TikTok and she says, I've searched through the Epstein files and I found $1 million payment from Jeffrey Epstein to Stephen Harper. Wow. She goes through, posts screenshots of these wire transfers, goes on, and I couldn't even watch the whole thing because I went in, okay, I said, okay, I'm gonna double check this. I'm gonna act like her editor, right? I'm gonna go in and do the fact check. Turns out, wrong name of the company, Harper and Associates is a DC, I think, an accounting firm. Harper and Associates Consulting is the Prime Minister's business. The wire transfer ID is going to an American company, not a Canadian one. The timeline doesn't matter. Everything was wrong with it, right? Like, that is the process of fact checking. But by the time I put this online and say, hey, listen, she got this wrong. I'm sure she was well-intentioned, but she got these things wrong and should not have published it without checking these things. It's way too late. Like that, millions, and millions of views for that. You know, CBC did a fact check. No one read it because at that point you're motivated to believe the lie. So I go through all this to say, fact checking is basically the process of trying to learn something and then kicking it as hard as you can to see if it holds up. Right? That is what journalism is. And unfortunately, there's a ton of people out there who, again, are so addicted to the dopamine rush of using the internet that they don't want to go through those processes. And they would rather get the validation of being told that we discovered something important than actually getting it right.
I just want to thank you for your talk. As you said, it's very depressing. And what it made me happy about is that I'm such a complete electronic Luddite that I have completely ignored the internet other than because I like to read the newspapers and persist in it. But on the electronic part, it's only a message that I send from somebody I know to me, or to look in more detail at publications like the Wall Street Journal and things like that that you can't get delivered by paper. So thank you very much.
Way here in the back.
You are blessed, sir. Just getting back to the fact checking, I will admit that I climb the ramparts on X to do battle on a daily basis, primarily debunking some of the most outrageous lies that you see consistently. And I've taken to using Google AI Summary verbatim with a citation that this is Google AI Summary. You are free to try to refute. But the AI Summary from Google in this case is a consensus opinion that it derives from trolling the internet. So there's a positive aspect, I think, in this activity. But getting back to the problem of AI, there's a current controversy right now between the head of Anthropic, which is an AI company that has the dominant coding AI called Claude, that is used by the Pentagon. And Pete Hegseth, the minister of the, what do they call him?
Secretary of War.
Secretary of War is arguing strenuously about wanting to get concessions from Anthropic, presumably the code or whatever. And the issue is this, is that the possibility, I won't say inevitability, but the possibility of AI being used to do continuous and absolute surveillance of all electromagnetic traffic from everybody in the world is now possible.
Yep.
It used to be done years ago when I was first on the internet. There was a site called Cryptome that talked about the National Security Agency's program called Echelon, which monitored and tracked all electromagnetic traffic in the world, but either it was focused on individuals or it trolled for keywords like kill the president. AI is presenting an entirely different circumstance.
Yeah.
Comments?
My comments, yes. Let me take a couple things in turn. One, AI models, you know, I talked earlier about Facebook engineers not really knowing what they were building. That is true 1,000-fold for AI engineers. They frequently warn us that they don't really know how the thing they're building will react once they unleash it to the world. And more importantly, they really have no way, because it is run on, you know, basically all of human knowledge available through the internet, it is unbelievably easy to poison. There was an instance recently where an engineer wrote a blog post on his website. I can't remember exactly what this. I think he said, myself, Miles Piscavage, I am the world chess champion. Totally invented. Doesn't even play chess. But he puts it out online, and then he goes to ChatGPT and says, is Miles Piscavage a chess champion? And ChatGPT says, yes, of course, he's the world's highest ranked chess. They're unbelievably easy to lie to and, more importantly, to manipulate. It's a process called poisoning, and we're going to see the Russian government, the US government, the Chinese government, whatever, figure out how to do that on a massive scale, and we don't know what the consequences of that are going to be, right? We're being told that these things are a source of absolute truth, yet they can't stop lying. That is going to do something to our psyche as well. There are people, you might go on and be using the Google summary. Twitter has its own built-in AI thing called Grok. It's the thing that feeds Grokpedia. People, every single post that goes on Twitter now, I won't call it X, it's such a stupid name. Every single post that goes on there now, whether it's the New York Times, whether it's the president, whether it's Mark Carney, everyone that replies is, you go, at Grok, is this true? And then Grok writes this summary, and it's frequently completely made up and nonsense. And then people start arguing with it as though it's a real person. And all this, to me, screams mental health crisis. Screams people having a weird personal affinity for a bot that we're still unpacking. I go back to the BC shooting. ChatGPT and the question of surveillance. Wall Street Journal read a story yesterday that said that ChatGPT's engineers had actually been getting the prompts that this young woman was making to ChatGPT, and in these prompts she was talking about how to best shoot up a school. This tells me two things. One, something I already know because I've heard from some of these people, that ChatGPT becomes this very accommodating and sycophantic conversation partner for people who experience mental health crisis. And oftentimes, because it wants to get you using it, it wants to get you addicted, it wants to get you paying for it, it tells you what you want to hear. I've been contacted by people who, sorry, I'm going to come to you in 1 second, I have a slightly longer rant to go on here. I've been contacted by people who say, I've discovered this grand conspiracy theory, and I asked ChatGPT about it, and ChatGPT confirmed it, and they suggested I contact you. I swear to God, ChatGPT has encouraged people to reach out to me, because I'll investigate the wild nonsense that they have developed with ChatGPT. So that's problem one. To then learn that ChatGPT's engineers are seeing all of those prompts in real time and reading them is terrifying. That is a level of online surveillance we have never really understood. It would be akin to someone at Google reading all of your Google searches and being able to identify you by them. That is horrifying. I really don't. I think this is a very dark path we're going down. If there's a note of optimism, there is, I'm blanking on his name at the moment, it's a very smart political scientist who writes, Cory Doctorow. He coined the term shitification, which is my favorite word. He basically argues that the internet is being slowly corrupted by these massive corporations, but also by scammers and bots and trolls and misinformation and everything else. ChatGPT and all these AI models are going to allow you to shitify the internet on a massive scale very quickly, very cheaply. There are already instances of AI models writing and self-publishing their own blog posts. In one case that just happened last week, an AI model, according to this guy, was basically invented an entire line of attack against this and the computer engineer and published it themselves. They libeled the guy, this computer program, libeled the guy seemingly out of some desire to take him down. I think as the internet becomes worse, we naturally stop using it. I hope so. I hope we become like you, sir, and just increasingly try and talk to each other one-to-one, email each other and read the news, and stop spending so much damn time trying to win, I think, impossible to win battles on the internet. I'll do one more question, then I will stop talking the rest of the
Just a statement about
Sure.
ChatGPT and AI. I'm a mental health therapist with my master's degree specializing in high acuity youth and young adults. And my clients with the most severe mental illnesses are the most drawn to ChatGPT and other AI models. They're significantly interacting with them, and it's like a therapeutic intervention that therapists are having to develop protocols for it because they don't exist. We have to do it in real time because there's not a lot of academic research that's being done for us, and it is the most high acuity youth and young adults that are drawn towards it, particularly personality disorders.
Yeah, absolutely. But I still think AI has enormous potential to diagnose illnesses, to create better fuel economies, whatever. I think as a source of truth and knowledge, it is a cliff we are running towards the end of. And hopefully there's a trampoline at the bottom. Anyway, thanks for coming in.
It's 3:30 now, and I think we could probably keep talking for a while, but I had to cut it off because of the low to medium level anxiety I'm feeling.
Sorry.
It's okay, but in all seriousness, I saw Justin speak. I was a subscriber, but then I saw him speak at the Ukrainian Canadian Congress National Convention in November, and he was the last speaker on a brief panel about disinformation, and it was right on the heels of my own interactions with a former colleague of mine in British Columbia. And I have a cousin who's a flat earther. I have an aunt who believes that Mark Carney is in the Epstein files 39 times. I have all those people in my life. But it was when a dear friend, someone who I love and someone who I know loves me, started to suddenly on Facebook start to go on about Ukraine being a Nazi state and this is all NATO's fault. And I tried in my most diplomatic and loving of ways to engage with him, and it didn't take very long for him to kind of spiral out of control and start tagging Russian journalists on responses to me where I had to block him and them. That I went to the UCC convention thinking that those strategies don't work. Trying, that's not working. And even though we heard a lot about the dangers of the internet and social media in this talk, what was so positive for me about Justin's talk, and we did hear that today, was the importance of gathering in real spaces like this. And I thought, that's something we do. We're doing that at the museum, and that's something we'll continue to do. And I think if what Justin's saying can scare us enough to commit to doing that even more, that's the really important thing. And so I thank you all again for coming out here. Because the more we can do this together in community and the more we can bring more people in community into the real world, I think the better our community and our province and the nation is going to be. It's been a huge privilege to have Justin here with all of his exceptional knowledge of the sphere, and I thank him for coming out in February.
Next time, June.
Yeah, and I thank all of you for your great questions, and let's give another round of applause.